Michael Seward's, Dick Musselman, Lehigh Valley World War II Roundtable, Allentown, Pennsylvania. Today's May 14th, 2008. Our interview tonight is with Lieutenant Colonel Cecilia Sulkowski, born February 16th, 1921. Cecilia is a veteran of World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. This is being done for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress.
I was born and raised in the town of Everson, Pennsylvania, a very small town, population about 1,500. So I went to high school in Scottsdale, Pennsylvania, because we didn't have a high school in Everson. So we had to go across the bridge to Scottsdale to Westmoreland County. I graduated in 1938 and I entered nursing in Westmoreland County Hospital in Greensburg, Pennsylvania. And it was a 3-year RN course. I graduated in nursing in 42, and the war at that time was going on, so being very patriotic, we enlisted. I was sent, my first assignment was at the Waycross, Georgia. It was Army Air Corps installation. I was there for 3 years. Then I went to Camp Swift, Texas. My basic training, we didn't have the training until I'd been in the Army for almost 2 years. And then we went to Tampa, Florida in August of the year, and it was beastly hot. And we took the 10-mile hike with the ambulance following us, but fortunately we were stalwart and nobody fell out. I stayed in the Army for 3 years. I decided to go out and I left the Army in 1946, and coming back from assignment, and I had a choice of either staying or leaving, but I was a little disappointed, so I left. And in a civilian life, took care of my sister who had difficult pregnancy, and she needed some substantial comfort and help. So I stayed with her until she delivered, and she delivered a baby girl who now is my caretaker. At that time too, while the 2 years that I was out, I went to I took a postgraduate course in operating room nursing, and that was in a graduate hospital in Philadelphia. From there I went to Cleveland and worked at the Deaconess Hospital for 2 years, and in 1948 I re-enlisted again, joined the Army, and went in as a regular Army. My assignments after that were varied. First assignment when I came back was at Valley Forge Hospital. At that time it was closing, so I helped them close that hospital. From there, can I stop? I'm losing trend of thought of assignments.
Take your time.
Valley Forge.
Valley Forge. It's complete blank. I have a little reminder here. gentlemen, I don't know.
Cecilia, let's back up to World War II. Let's back up to World War II. Let's tell us some more about World War II.
In World War II, I was not in the shooting army, but my assignments at Camp Swift, Texas, we receiving patients that had been wounded in the European theater. So it made a very interesting time for me.
Were you in Europe? Were you in the European theater at all?
No.
Okay.
I was strictly stateside, and
What type of injuries did you see, Cecilia?
I went in August of '45. I was on a ship being sent to Europe, the Eastern Theater operation. Oh my. I was in Osaka, Germany. This was in 1944. And from there, that's where I was being sent to overseas. We sailed on the ship, the Comfort, which had 500 nurses going to relieve the nurses who had been in the theater from the very beginning of the war.
What type of injuries did you receive? What type of patients?
The patients we received were all sorts of patients. You had patients who had been had direct hits, abdominal hits. We had amputees that lost their arms or legs. A lot of them some of them were facial injuries. Some of the patients that I saw in Europe, and when I was stationed at Valley Forge, strictly plastic surgeons mostly, and some of those patients we had over in Germany and a Far East. I was sent to Korea in 1949 and 50 when the war started there with the MASH unit. The MASH unit was the 2054. There were two MASH outfits going, the first two MASH units going to Korea, and we stayed, my outfit stayed in Busan. the other one advanced into further north, going north in the Korean. As the war was progressing, they were going with the units they ended at the Yalu River. Then there was the big push at the Yalu River, so everything was coming down to Busan. And we looked in the harbor, and we didn't see one ship, and we wondered what we were going to do, since all the units were coming to us, and there was no place else to go. Fortunately, the war turned around, and the American troops were going back, pushing back north.
How far were you from the front lines?
I stayed in Busan,
So,
which was quite a distance. We did see shrapnel, we did see fire going off. We saw shots. It was like watching fireworks. We were far enough away, though, that we weren't afraid of injuries, and our hospital was in a safe situation. We set up, the hospitals we set up in Korea was in a schoolhouse, because that was the only building that was as substantial and built. And we scrubbed down 3 schoolhouses, setting up because of changing positions as the fighting proceeded.
how did the patients arrive there? Ambulance, helicopter?
Ambulance, we had a helicopter pad. And then when our hospital was overrun, when our hospital was filled to capacity and some, we transported the patients by ship to Japan. And we got to go to, with a nurse and a physician and technician, 2 technicians went on a small ship with patients. We send them to hospitals in Japan.
What exactly were your duties in the hospital?
I was an operating room nurse. There the operating room nurses. When we set up in this schoolhouse, we got this one little room with the floor was good old earth. We had tables sitting one close to the other. What we learned about sterile technique had to be forgotten, because the tables we did the best we could. Tables were close together. After we got through taking care of all our patients, and they weren't sending any more because the fighting had lessened in the theater, we were getting the Korean, they were picking the Korean soldiers up and bringing them to the hospital for treatment. And that was my first experience with maggots. They were little crawlies, but the thing is, the maggots the wounds were so clean, the cleanest wounds you'd ever want to see, because the maggots cleaned them out. But we didn't care for them too much. We had to shake our clothing out when we changed, because they were you couldn't help it but get some on yourself. There were so many, we were just infested so much with them. The doctors, we worked different shifts. Sometimes we would get convoys in, one right after the other, maybe 1,000 patients within 12 hours. So you had to work and space yourself so you could work. It took a little while to find out what our capacity was. We tried different, whether we'd work 8 hours on, 8 hours off, or then we worked 12 hours on, 12 hours off, and we worked many hours until everything was cleared up. And we worked to exhaustion. But we were there to help the boys, and they were so grateful to us for being there to help them, especially the female nurses who were greeted with open arms. They hadn't seen an American female for years, and they were very happy to see us.
So you had some contact with the wounded? You got to talk to them?
Yes, we did, because they stayed in long enough, and they wanted to talk, so that was part of the treatment, really, to listen to them. And you would be maybe taking care of one and listening to 2 or 3 others chiming in with their stories and the way they were feeling, and they were expressing themselves. The saddest part that I had in Korea, the first contingency of patients that we received were not young recruits. They were seasoned soldiers. They were broke, their spirit was broken. They were sent to fight with inadequate clothing, inadequate ammunition. It was so heartbreaking, even to this day. I can't really talk about them.
The weather was bad? The weather was cold?
The weather was very cold, and we were sent there. We were awakened that day, and we were told that we should be ready by 6 o'clock that evening. We were going to be going to Korea. We were in Japan, actually living a very comfortable life. We had to get some fatigues. We couldn't go in our nurses' uniform that we were wearing. My first pair of fatigues, the crotch was down to the knees. Our sleeves were rolled up until I had like a ball of fur around the sleeves. And after a while, when September came around, it got very cold. We didn't have any winter clothing, but we could go down to the black market and buy our winter clothing, and they were the U.S. Army issues. They got them somehow. The black market had gotten them instead of us. My experience in the Army was something that I would give advice to anybody that is a good life, and it's what you make it, not you may have to give up a little bit, but there's a lot of in return. I got to travel. I had 2 tours in Europe of 2.5 years each. At that time, I traveled to, and when I had leave, I would go on trips. And I got to see quite a bit of Europe, in the same way when I was in Japan. When I felt that I was over in some country, that I would make the best of it, because their culture was different and it was very interesting.
Did you ever treat any of the North Koreans?
Yes, we did. As I said, when we had cleared up the hospital of our patients, we had sent our patients to Japan, and we didn't get any wounded from the field, from the front lines. They brought in the North Koreans, and we would treat them. And being in nursing, you treated people, whether they were white, black, or purple. We treated them the same, gave them good treatment, and they were grateful for it.
Did you have any humor like they do in the TV show MASH? Did that happen at all?
Yes, you did, and you had to have, like MASH, you had to have some humor to relieve all the devastation that you saw and the poor wounded people coming in. The doctors, we had set up we got to set up some beds in the part of the schoolhouse. The doctors had downstairs floor, we had the second floor. And one night, one of the doctors was playing around evidently with his gun. The first thing we knew, we had a shot come up through the floor. The doctor was playing with his gun, didn't know it was loaded. The other thing is, as I said, when we had patients coming in large amounts, we'd be very tired. The doctors were, at that time, there were at least 6 doctors on their off time. The Koreans came in and they stole them blind. And I mean blind because they took glasses and everything. One of the surgeons had only one pair of glasses and he had it under his pillow. And when he got awake, there were no glasses. So he couldn't even do surgery until we got some glasses for him from Japan. We had to laugh at them because they were supposed to be such stalwart, heavy, good people, strong people, big heroes, and he couldn't even wake up to when somebody was robbing them. We had to be careful of our possessions. Anything American was good. Carton of cigarettes would bring you quite a few things that you could buy, you could find on the black market. I tried at one time, I had 2 cartons of cigarettes, and I was just talking to Mama San at the time, negotiating my trade, and the cigarettes fell. And I thought, my gosh, MP's going to come and take me to jail. That was my first and last time attempting to black market.
What was the food like?
The food was powdered eggs. We had we used our mess kit to eat, so it was all on the mess kit. Got your potatoes and meat and sweet whatever you had all messed up in one place. It wasn't very appetizing. To this day, I can't eat fruit cocktail. We had fruit cocktail for we got morning, noon, night, and that might have been part of the breakfast. We also had K rations, which were some of them weren't too bad. And when we took the patients over to Japan on the ship, we usually went with a market list for, we could go to the PX in Japan and get these things like atomic chocolate bars for people, cookies, crackers, delicacies that we weren't getting in Korea. I was nurse, so my career of nursing would have been civilian, and I was the same in the military. We had geriatric, we had pediatric patients because we had their dependents, so it was a rounded out career. I was had one time Ed sent me to school in Washington, D.C. In supervision, which was a break and furthered my career. I was sent to what we called finishing school in San Antonio. So the Army was pushed schooling very much, and also wouldn't attend the local colleges, take 1 or 2 courses at night.
With the amount of casualties you had in Korea, obviously some of the guys died.
Yes, they did.
Did that have an effect on you, or did you get used to that ever? Or?
You never got used to it. That's where the humor would come in, and what would help is that you did everything you possibly could for them. It was heartbreaking that you couldn't save them all. Triage started in the Army, which was good. It was hard to understand why they would not take the worst casualty first, but the triage worked on the most that we could save. So some of them had to go wait their turn. Eventually we would get to them. Some we didn't. We couldn't do it. We were the only hospital that wasn't on the, when I was in Busan, it wasn't on the move. The other, the MASH units, they were first established during the Korean War. And World War II, they had field hospitals. They didn't call them MASH units, the field hospital. Field units took care of them. Their work was the same as what the MASH had to do. When we got to Busan, as I said, there were 2 MASH units going over at the same time. So all the equipment was unloaded on shore. It wasn't marked for either hospital. It was a corporal who was the biggest goof-off you would ever see. And he managed to know exactly which unit he was talking, who person he was talking to was from which unit. He didn't do a stitch of work. He had the best time because he got around. You said to him, well, you do this, and what are you doing? Well, I'm not with this outfit, I'm with that other outfit. So he really got away with it. Later on we found out about it, of course, and chuckled about it. And I learned when I first went into the Army in '43, my assignment in Waycross, Georgia, I learned more from the sergeant and the corporal there stationed there. They gave me more guidance as to what the military medicine is like. We were it was a very small outfit of 10 nurses, and we were all very young and with our first assignment, so we needed all the help we could get. And they were the biggest help. They were very greatly appreciated. And the Army is run by sergeants and corporals, believe me.
Well, what did you do after Korea?
After Korea, 50, let's see, where did I go?
Do you remember where you came back to the States at?
Yeah, I was back in the States, and I was stationed at Fort Belvoir, Virginia. And there they had built a new hospital, and I had the privilege of ordering supplies and starting up a new outfit.
When did you first get to Vietnam?
I wasn't stationed in Vietnam. I was stationed stateside there again. I was stationed at Walter Reed. We were receiving patients from Vietnam, directly from Vietnam. As I said, the only shooting war I was in was in Korea. Otherwise, I was on stateside duty.
How do you find Walter Reed, at that time? How do you find the conditions at Walter Reed?
They were good. They were top conditions. That's why when I read about how they were complaining it deteriorated, I couldn't imagine that they let it go to that point. We didn't have patients in this annex that they were talking about. We had in the hospital, they were building the new hospital at the time. And in fact, we had a lot of the patients who were in the Navy, and they came to Walter Reed instead of Bethesda because they said they had better treatment at Walter Reed than they had at Bethesda. They liked the Army treatment better.
Were the casualties any different from Vietnam than they were in Korea? The types of wounds, or?
No, about the same, yes.
And did the medical techniques change that much? Were you able to save more people from Vietnam than you were from Korea?
We were able to get to them sooner and treat them. Helicopters were one reason why we were able to move the patients as we did, as quickly as we did.
After Vietnam was over, what did you do then?
I left the Army in 1970. I was stationed at Fort Dix, and the Army had changed so much. Discipline was lax. It wasn't the same Army that I knew when I first came in, and that I served in for at least till 48. And that's when I noticed a change in discipline and
Did you spend most of your time in the OR?
the what?
Did you spend most of your time in the OR
Yes.
during your career?
That was my training. That and night supervision. I was when I was sent to Fort Belvoir, the chief nurse said that she didn't have an opening in the operating room then, but she desperately needed a night supervisor. And I had finished the supervision course at Catholic U, so, and she was so pitiful when she was telling me this, that she just moved me, so I did accept that assignment. And so I was night supervisor at Fort Belvoir.
So you supervised other Army nurses?
Yes, you you were the chief nurse at night. Any problems that the nurses came across that they couldn't handle, you were the one that they came to. I told the chief nurse that being an operating room nurse for most of my career, I was very rusty in medicines. And she said that there's a dictionary in the office, there are books there, and there's a telephone. In other words, I would, those were my things that I could fall back on. And usually what I found is part of it was in the main hospital, and then part of the hospital was still in the old barracks type buildings where you had to have 30, 60 patients all in a row. And usually when I was in one end of the hospital, they called me at the other end. I always felt like I had to have a scooter to run from one place to the other. In fact, I did from time to time jump into my auto car and ride over if I was parked at that end. As I said, my military career was enhanced as medicine. I get to travel that I would not be able to afford to travel on my own. I was really a little country girl leaving home the first time, and I was going, and I had to change trains in Washington, D.C. You talk about a mess. Oh, and I think I spent about 10 hours between trains. Then I got on this train that had a potbelly stove and rattan seats, straight backs, and that was a trip from Washington, D.C. to Waycross, Georgia. Not very comfortable, believe me. No air conditioning at that time.
So you mentioned that you had a problem in the operating room in Korea. You said that the operating tables were so close together.
Yes.
And you had a problem with sterilization.
Sterilization, you did the best you could.
How did you overcome that? What did you use? Do you have autoclaves and things like that?
We had autoclaves. We had sterile dressings that were shipped in sometimes. And when we ran out of sterile dressing, we used what we call clean goods. They weren't sterilized, but they were not contaminated grossly.
Did you lose many patients to infection? Was that a big problem?
We didn't keep our patients that long, actually. The ones that needed help, we would evacuate them to Japan. That's where I said we would load a ship. I don't know what they call those little ships, but there was a small little ship that would take maybe 100 patients at one time to Japan. They were the ones who needed the definitive care that we could not give them. Being in the operating room too, I didn't see the patients who were dying on the wards. get to know some of it by talking with the other nurses. They would come off duty, would discuss what your day was like and what happened, but we didn't lose patients in the operating room. And we used technicians a lot for scrubs to do the duties of a scrub nurse or circulating, or you might have a technician doing technicians at two tables, and you were at the third, but at the same time you were supervising the two technicians. And there again, it was the Army that started training OR techs. The Army medicine and nursing was far in advance of civilian medicine. When I was going to the OR conferences, we'd compare notes with the civilian. So we ran across, and it was amazing. We were doing things that they couldn't do. We could start an IV, they couldn't start an IV. We could use our judgment on different things. My mother was in a hospital. I was out of the Army at the time, and she was very ill, seriously ill, and I took one of the shifts. I was took the 311 shift to take care of her, and she was gasping for breath, practically turning blue, and I asked the nurses on the ward to please bring me an oxygen tank. And they were horrified to think that they were going to have to start. I was asking for an IV tank to start IV without a doctor's order right there. But I raised so much pain, they did give me the oxygen tent, and then we cleared it with the doctor when he came on. He says, definitely. And I saved my mom's life at that time because of the oxygen. So we had more experience in things, starting IVs and using our judgment on things. Now they have doctors' assistants, and they have nurses who are clinicians, which are doing duties of a doctor, except for ordering medicines and except for ordering narcotics. Otherwise, they do the same thing that a doctor can do, write orders and take histories.
So you came out in 1970 from the Army. You left the Army in 1970?
Yes.
Was that at your current rank, or did you?
It was my rank. I was Lieutenant Colonel, and I think a year before that I made Lieutenant Colonel.
You progressed very well.
Yes. When I made captain when I was in Japan, and I had to scrounge around with other people to make a complete uniform to get my bars when they was presenting the chief of the hospital would present your rank. And as I said, I had to scrounge around to get a complete uniform. We had kind of a country club life in Japan before the war started, before the Korean War started. But we paid back for it later.
Can you tell us what medals or citations you received during your service?
I have European theater, theater of occupation. I did receive a bronze medal in Korea for outstanding duty, which was just duty I would have been doing without expecting to get a medal. That is my highest medal that I've gotten. Since I've been here in Allentown, I received the Korean medal, from one of the outfits that they have here, the Retired Officers Association organization. The Korean government presented this medal to the American soldiers who were there, served in Korea, or even served during the Korean War, but were over there, that were in the army.
Did you have any other family members that were in the service?
Yes, my mother had four in the military in World War II. And my oldest brother, Joe, was in the Air Force. He was a bombardier navigator. He was shot down over Belgium. But he was very fortunate. He was picked up by in the Netherlands. He was picked up by the natives, and they hid him and got him safely to American troops. But we didn't hear from him for at least 10 months, 11 months. We didn't know whether he was. We knew his plane went down, but he was listed as missing in action. So we knew, and kept hoping that it was true that he was alive. When we finally heard through the military, they came to my mom's and told her that Joe was safe and he was going to be coming to the States. And in a short time, he would be home. Not discharged from the Air Force, but he'd be on leave. It was a very happy time for my mother. Then my younger brother, Walter, 2 years younger than I, was in the Air Force, and he was a cadet. He hadn't graduated from the cadet school yet, and the war was over, and he was discharged. My brother Vince was in the Navy. He was in during World War II, and then he separated, and then he was recalled for the Korean War, and he was, during the Korean War, he was on a minesweeper, and we tried the worst way to meet someplace, but every time we thought we were going to conquer or have a meeting, something would happen on his end or my end. All that time we were in Korea when the ship would dock in Busan. Maybe I was away someplace there, maybe in the north part of Korea at that time. So we never did meet. So that was the four of us that were in service. I always felt more a pity for the dependents, for the spouses. When somebody in the military gets orders for overseas, The Army takes care of them. They get them their tickets, they get them everything. And the wife doesn't have any much help at all. She could have 6 children, had half a dozen or a dozen kids, has to leave the area, has established a new home for them, and has to be mother and father to the children. And also it could be the male who went and the female who went and left the male spouse to do all that. So they really had it harder than the military when we got orders.
Do you ever keep in touch with anybody you knew in the service? Any reunions?
Yeah, our operating room had, the retired Army nurses have an organization, that we have a reunion every year. And every year it's in a different area, in the United States. And that whoever the military are there, whoever the nurses are living there, belonging to the retired Army Nurse Association, set up all the plans for the meetings. It's really a social type of meeting. We have speakers. We do have. It's usually a 4-day thing. We have speakers. We have a luncheon speaker, and we have a banquet, and we have meetings. Speakers, a current chief nurse generally comes to tell us what the latest situation is as far as nurses are concerned. Nurse Corps is now, when a nurse joins the military, she has to have a BS. But that when I went in, that wasn't you didn't have to have a degree. But as I said, military push education. There are many nurses who, after they've gotten out, have gone to school, have gotten their masters and PhDs, are very active in nursing. I attended to until, let's see, I attended every one of the reunions until '98, when I had a stroke, and I have partial vision. I lost part vision on left side of each eye. Couldn't travel very well, and became a diabetic and a few other things, medical problems that kept me from going. But then we also have a newsletter which we get. It's called The Connection, and it's published quarterly. And I still receive a copy, and it gives the news of nurses from the entire United States. We're divided into regions, and we have a head, and each region has one person who is responsible for collecting the news of what the nurses are doing in their area. And then it's sent to the San Antonio, and the letter is published.
Would you like to add anything else, Cecilia?
No, I can't think. very interesting person, but
We have a very long service, which we are honoring tonight. And that's-
yes, I have 26 years of service in the military. We had a gathering here for Armed Forces Day last year. We have 53 veterans on the campus, and the Armed Forces had we had the state legislators came and presented each veteran with a medal for the war they were in, and so with 53 veterans and with their families coming in, we had over 100 people attended, and Country Meadows put out a very good, beautiful program, and I was honored. I was chosen to open the meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. At that time, I still could stand on, didn't have the amputation, I could stand my 2 feet, my uniform, and lead the, they had a presentation of arms which a lot of the people had never seen, and that, you know, is a very impressive sight. And we had, at the end, we had taps. And really a very wonderful presentation that leaders sponsored.
Well, I want to thank you for the interview. It was very interesting, and I thank you for the service to our country.
Well, I'm sorry I glitched so many times, but I haven't been in very good health for the past year, and having a little trouble recuperating. You don't bounce back as quickly as you do when you were young.
You did fine.
You did very well.
Thank you very much.
I'm very honored.
Thank you, Cecilia.
You're welcome. You're welcome, Dick. You're welcome, Mike. Thank you again, and good night. Take care. God bless.